Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, delighted as always, and finally to be back with you for another author interview. Hope you are, you've had a great week and that you're currently having a good weekend. It's not my usual intro. As we get started, I do want to remind you, as always, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. Definitely helps the algorithm, gets this podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. If you are interested, you can also go to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave a tip or a donation. That is also greatly appreciated. That also really helps not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. If while you're there, you'd like to leave a question or a comment, I'm happy to engage with those. Love hearing from you. So drop me a line and I will respond to that as soon as I can. But again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. As always, your support in the past, currently, and future support, of course, is always very, very much appreciated. So usually I say happy to be with you on another Tuesday, or sometimes it's a Friday when I have two episodes or something prevents the Tuesday episode. You may notice that this is neither Tuesday nor Friday. This is in fact Saturday, and there is several reasons for that. First of all, as you know, there was a week missed because my husband and I celebrated our wedding anniversary. That was lovely. We didn't do anything major. We, of course, spent the day together. We watched old movies. It was delightful. Took some time off, didn't work, and just enjoyed each other's company, enjoyed the dog's company. That was amazing. And then I had this interview for today. Should have gone up on Tuesday, like usual. My schedule just blew up in a few different ways this past week. Not going to bore you with details, but several things came together, perfect storm of schedule craziness. So, okay, no problem. It'll go up on Friday, my alternative day. Well, then I got sick. And then the dog ate my homework. No, the dog didn't eat my homework, but I had major technological issues. I was up until 2 this morning trying to get everything taken care of. Finally got everything worked out, and here we are. I will say, just as a bit of a forewarning, that in a couple of the segments, there's a little bit of a lag as the recording starts, the segments of the interview. So when we go into the interview, there may be a little bit of a little lag as those start. It's only a couple of seconds each time. Hang in there. The rest of the recording is fine. Thank you for your patience. Your support is greatly appreciated. Your patience is greatly appreciated. Hope you're having a great weekend. Ours is, we took last weekend off, but this weekend we are back to it, getting things taken care of. We still found time to watch a Bing Crosby movie today from 1939 that neither of us had ever seen. I love Bing Crosby. He just makes me feel like Christmas, even though it was not a Christmas movie. Bing Crosby, Christmas, kind of go together in my brain. So that was a lot of fun. But let's talk about today's book, today's author. I am speaking this week with author Judith Valente about her book, The Italian Soul. Let me give you the description of that book. The Italian Soul is a pilgrimage of the heart, a journey toward change that will allow its readers to approach life with a more contemplative stance and recreate a sense of the dolce vita, the sweet life, wherever they might be. The Italian Soul offers practical guidance into how we can transport a taste of the Italian good life into our own homes. Additionally, it explores the contemplative practices and attitudes that seem to come naturally to a people who have made an art of living and working joyfully. A cross between a travel dispatch and a spirituality guide for seekers who eschew traditional religious practices but are yearning for more ways to bring balance, sanity, and a greater sense of the transcendent into their daily lives. Written by veteran journalist Judith Valente, who has lived and traveled extensively in Italy, The Italian Soul shares personal stories and insights into the Italian way of life, focusing on the attitudes, traditions, and practices that make the people of Italy role models for experiencing delight amid the demands and distractions of ordinary living. Readers will feel as though they are walking along, peering into windows, glimpsing activities as they unfold. The Italian Soul is a book for lovers of Italy, those considering visiting Italy for the first time, and anyone who is interested in learning more about the art of living joyfully. And so again, that is the description of The Italian Soul by Judith Valente. And if you've never been to Italy, you might feel a little bit of that through this book. She talks about the people and the culture and a lot of the places that she's lived, because she has lived for extended period of time in more than one city or small town or place in Italy, which brings a different perspective. We talk about that. And she just talks about the things that she has experienced with and through the Italian people that she feels might resonate with her readers, what they might take away from some of the things that she has learned from living in Italy, living amongst the Italians, and just immersing herself in their culture, in their way of life, in their spirituality, in their food, in everything like that. So she, of course, is going to tell you that much better than I can. So let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Judith. Again, the book is called The Italian Soul. The author is Judith Valente. Hi, Judith, and welcome podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. I am excited to talk to you about your book, The Italian Soul. But before we get to the book, if you would take just a few moments to introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Sure, I was a journalist for much of my career. I started at the Washington Post at the age of 21, went on to the Wall Street Journal, and then went into broadcast, PBS TV, and public radio in here in Illinois, where I now live. And so I covered faith and values for a long time for national PBS TV. And when I took early retirement, I started to write spirituality books. And so, 6 books later and 3 collections of poetry later, I have not looked back about leaving daily journalism.
Yeah, wow. So you've I mean 6 books and 3 books of poetry. You seem to be enjoying it.
Paid my dues.
Yes, yes. Well, can you give an overview of the Italian Soul?
Yeah, The Italian Soul is the latest book, and it arose out of the fact that I was spending extended periods in Italy, which is the home of my ancestors. All 4 of my grandparents are from Italy, and my all of my previous books have been how to live a more contemplative life in the secular world. That's what I've been interested in the last few decades of my life. How to be a contemplative in action, in other words. And
Mm.
I went to Italy and I saw that people live contemplative lives almost naturally. Um, the contemplative values of of achieving balance in life, of building community, of being good listeners. All of that I saw in the Italian people, whether I was living in a small town or in a larger city, which I've done both. I've done extended periods in both kinds of places. And so I wanted to write a book, which became The Italian Soul: How to Savor the Full Joys of Life, to give people this, practical suggestions about what we can take from the Italian lifestyle and build into our own hectic, busy pace here in the United States.
Hmm. Yeah, and one thing I like about just being someone who lives in another country as well is that you've spent extended periods of time in Italy. So you've been to lots of different places, not just the ones that we always hear about or that, the tourists tend to go to, which I always think is enjoyable just to see more of a country than where you tend to go when you're only there for a few days. Um,
Sure, I always say, fine, go to Florence, Rome, Venice, get that out of your system. But then pick a region of Italy that is less well known to tourists. I mean, I'm not even talking about the Amalfi Coast or Tuscany, which many, is full of tourists. I'm
yeah.
talking about places that like Basilica and Puglia and Abruzzo, which is one of my favorite provinces or regions, I should say, Abruzzo, and go there and spend 2 weeks, say, in the same region, even in the same town, so that you get to experience the rhythm of the town
Yeah.
and get to know the locals and the local customs, because it's very easy to make friends in Italy. I guess it's something we'll talk about a little bit later in the interview. But Italians are just very hospitable, very open. They love Americans. And so if you spend a few weeks in the same place, you're going to go home with new friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you are my husband who makes friends wherever he goes. I'm not as good at it, but he is. Um, so you mentioned that, you've written contemplative books and suddenly started noticing that people in Italy were already living that way. But was there a specific instance that kind of prompted you to think maybe I should write this book?
Well, I guess you could say a series of instances. One story I like to tell. I've always been a workaholic. Let's get that confession out there, and an overachiever. And I write a column on for Facebook and Medium.com every Sunday. And one Sunday I was invited to lunch at a friend's house, and her parents were going to be there as well, and her husband. The Sunday dinner is very sacrosanct still in Italy, the family dinner on Sunday. So it was kind of a big deal. Well, I hadn't finished my column for that day, so I bring along my computer to the lunch, figuring, okay, maybe before the lunch begins, I can get a little bit of writing in. So I pull out my computer and start typing at a coffee table. And my friend's mother is kind of looking at me strangely. And so I said, oh, I'm just trying to finish up a little bit of writing before our meal begins. And she stared at me and said, it's Sunday. And so closed down the computer, put it out of sight for the rest of the day. But the real lesson came a little bit later that day when we had this lovely, 2 hour meal, leisurely meal, and then we went for a long stroll along the Adriatic Sea. And I was able to get my column finished later in the day, but still in time to get it out. And what I learned from that experience was I didn't have to sacrifice time with my friends, time savoring a lovely meal. I could still do all that and get my work done.
Mm,
And that's kind of a lesson that I've carried away from me and that I learned early on in one of my stays in Italy.
yeah. Yeah, I think we're always our brains tend to be in two places. Like we're here, but we're thinking about, okay, what do I need to be doing or should I be doing? We get split that way. I know myself, I can be so easily distracted. Maybe you can too. I often am somewhere and I am enjoying myself, but my brain can be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be doing this, and I'm supposed to be doing this, and I need to do this, X, Y, and Z, one, two, three, etc. So many things. And so sometimes I need the reminder that I can be more present. I don't need to constantly be thinking of my to-do list. But we are going to take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about meals and taking your time during meals, being present during those meals, etc. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Judith Valente. This is your second and final reminder that if you want to help the podcast and the network as a whole in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave a donation, leave me a tip, buy me a coffee, however you want to look at that. Not really me a coffee because it helps the entire network as well as this podcast. You'll see that link next to me in the video that's playing currently, but you're also going to see it scrolling along the bottom throughout the episode, so you can be reminded of that link if you need it. Thank you, as always, for all of the help that you've given the podcast. Your support is very, very much appreciated. Before the break, Judith was sharing an anecdote about going to a friend's house in Italy for lunch, thinking she was going to do some work, being reminded, I don't know, gently, not so gently, however that went down, by the friend's mother that it was Sunday. She needed to maybe, not work right now. When she had lunch, they went for a lovely walk. It was a great afternoon. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Judith. You mentioned meals and the 2 hour. And one thing that we've had to get used to living in Europe is eating out. Eating with friends and family, of course, yeah, that's a long meal, but eating out, you're not rushed. We're so what's the word I'm looking for? Trained, I guess, in America and restaurants to, get in, get out, you eat, then they flip the table. Here, you can sit at that table as long as you want and nobody is going to say anything.
I think that's a beautiful aspect of life in Europe and especially in Italy, where food and wine are so important. Um, there is a certain reverence for the meal table. It's not just a place to shovel as much food into your mouth as fast as you can to get off to more important things. No, the dinner table is really a time for communion. And it relates, Italy is a Catholic country. And for me, it kind of relates to the Eucharistic table, the altar table at the Catholic Mass. That too is a meal. And I think that seeps into the culture of eating and the culture of food as well in Italy. And I think it's a beautiful thing
Mhm.
to to look at that time as a time of communion as well as a time of nourishing the body.
Yeah. And that's a nice point. You bring up communion, Eucharist, the Catholicism of Italy, but you also said at the beginning that you write contemplative books for more secular perspectives. So for you, how do you find the balance, especially writing about a very Catholic country? How do you find that balance of bringing in those more religious aspects, but talking about them from a more secular perspective?
Yeah, I think any of us, whether we're a spiritual seeker or, a devout person of faith, understands the importance of community, for example,
Mhm.
and balance in life, and the importance of cultivating a sense of belonging and friendships. I think those are values that we can all share, whether we're daily mass goers or never, or never never step foot inside of a church or a place of worship. And what I talk about in the book is a kind of a great sense of balance that the Italians have. There's these phrases that we associate with Italy: il dolce far niente, the sweet do nothing, and
Mhm.
uh, there's a few other phrases, and what it shows is that people in Italy, they work hard. Italy is the third largest economy in Europe, but they don't live to work. They work to live. And I
Mhm.
think that's something that we've forgotten here in the United States. Something I write about in the book is how, Italians get 5 weeks of vacation automatically,
Yeah.
automatically.
Yeah.
And and here, we're lucky if we get 2 weeks of vacation.
Hmm.
And statistics show that a large percentage of Americans, something like 40%, never take their full allotment of vacation time.
Hmm.
You're a nation of, you know, workaholics. We have this mania about working, which Italians don't have, and yet they get their work done.
Yeah. Yeah. At 5 weeks of vacation, plus there's a lot of bank holidays, that may be saint days or religious
Yeah,
holidays, but everyone gets them
religious
off.
holidays and bank holidays, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is something else that you have to kind of get used to. And lots of things are not open on those days. So,
Yeah,
uh,
and the economy functions. This
yeah.
the society continues to function, and I don't understand why we think every store has to be open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, you know.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it is occasionally convenient when I want that 2 a.m. snack, but that once every 3 years I want a 2 a.m. snack doesn't mean it needs to be open.
Right. Well, and it's a question of planning. For example, in the small towns, shops will close at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so people can have a long leisurely lunch.
Yeah.
So you better get your shopping done before 1 o'clock because the stores aren't going to reopen until 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And same thing on Sunday. Most of the places, the retail establishments and the food shops will close at 1 o'clock in the afternoon so people can have that long, leisurely Sunday meal with family and friends.
Yeah. Since you've written books similar to this before, how do you write so that, you're building on what you've already written, but also make it different for people who've already read the other books?
Yeah, well, something that comes, I guess, from my many years as a journalist is is telling stories. So the book isn't full of philosophical arguments or it's not preachy. It's just filled with stories that I've experienced, encounters I've had. Um, it's filled with anecdotes about the Italian people that illustrate what I'm trying to say about their sense of balance, but also their the value, the emphasis that they put on friendship, for example. This whole thing about community in Italy was something that I really was so impressed with because I went over there for an extended stay during the pandemic. Well, the pandemic was just ending, actually.
Mm.
And I saw how there was this great sense of we're all in this together. You see, people were still wearing masks, for example. There were still limited numbers to how many could go into a store at the same time. And the stores are kind of small in Italy.
Yeah.
Most of them, they're not, these mega stores like we have, Costco and
Yeah.
Walmart and all that. And so, people would have to stand outside and wait for other people to come out before they went in. But there was a sense that we're all in this together. And I remember going on a public bus to the airport when I was leaving for this particular extended stay. And there was a guy on the bus, masks were required at that time on the bus, who simply refused to wear his mask. And the bus driver said, I'm going to stop this bus. We're not going to go anywhere unless everybody is masked. And of course, the man, let loose a stream of expletives and what have you, but he eventually put on his mask. But, this was the kind of, resistance that we had to addressing a pandemic together as a community. And I didn't see that in Italy. And it was very heartening to be over there at that time.
Yeah. Well, Italy was hit so hard at the beginning of the
Exactly.
pandemic. It's understandable how they would come together in that way, and encouraging.
And they've known pandemics through their history. They've known plague through their history. So they knew that this was not an encroachment on our individual rights. This was an effort to keep everyone safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Early in the book, you talk about, well, chatting because I can't think of the Italian for it, but
Sure.
talk a little bit about that sense of community.
Yeah, I talk about chiacchiera, which is really this kind of chit chat that goes on. It describes a kind of ad hoc chit chat that goes on in the piazzas, in the cafes, on park benches, and I think that this sense of, for example, I have friends who get up in the morning and the first thing they do is go into the piazza to meet with their friends for an espresso or a cappuccino. And it's this sense of this chit chat that goes on, I think that creates a sense of belonging in people. And when I lived in the city of Casino for an extended period, my landlord was an 80-year-old man named Franco Malatesta, who was a widower. And every day, he would put on a fedora, his leather jacket, and walk several blocks to the Cafe Paradiso. And there he would just meet for an hour with his friends. They called it going to their office. They were all in their 80s and
Mhm.
retired. And, they would just sit and chit chat about, the soccer teams that they liked, the latest twist and turn of Italian politics. But it gave Franco really a sense that he belonged, a place to go where he knew he was going to be welcomed and accepted. And you find that Italy has one of the longest, um, the greatest longevity of in all of Europe is in Italy. I think they're third, if I'm not mistaken, third longest life expectancy of all of Europe, behind just Switzerland.
Mm.
Now, the United States is 48th
Yeah.
in the world in longevity. Now, why is that? We supposedly have this great healthcare system, but Mother Teresa, when she came to this country, made an astute observation. She said the great American illness is not heart disease or cancer, it is loneliness.
Yeah.
And she said that back in the 80s. And our former Surgeon General, who just retired a few years ago, has written a book where he talks about what he calls an epidemic of loneliness in America. So I see this sense of community, this fostering of belonging through chit chat and meeting in the piazzas and meeting in the cafes. I see that as contributing to the overall health and well-being and longevity of the Italian people. And I think that's something we can learn from them.
Yeah. When it comes to health and wellness, we often think about eating right and exercising and maybe even mental health, mental wellness, those things. But we don't always think about community and the role community can play in our overall health and wellness. And I think that that is a really interesting part of the conversation, as Judith was just highlighting, with loneliness being a problem, and the that part of Italian society being very social and very encompassing in terms of community. So I think that is very important. We're going to go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about what Judith hopes readers might take away from the book as a whole. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Judith Valente. Before the break, Judith was talking about the longevity of the Italian people as a whole and some of the things that may be contributing to, or we can attribute that longevity to. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Judith. Do you have an overall hope for what we might take away from the book?
Absolutely. I hope that they pay more attention to their relationships and work a little bit less, realize that they can work less and live more and still get everything done, still earn as much as they need to earn. And I hope that people decide to take as much care of themselves and care of themselves in the sense of the time that they need to replenish their own souls by doing things that they like, as much as to give that as much time as they give to their work lives. So that's one big thing that I'm hoping people take away from the book, because we can take pauses, we can have balance in our lives, and still find time for the things that we need to do for our work lives.
Yeah. Is there anything particular that you took away, maybe unexpected, from the writing of the book?
Well, I cook every day now, because cooking is a big thing in Italy. You really want to cook because the ingredients are so fresh. You go to the market every day and get things fresh from the market. So I cook every day. My husband and I try to sit down at the dining room table instead of we used to watch the news hour and eat.
Hmm.
um, and in the TV room. We don't do that anymore. We sit at the table now and we eat, because we try to make it a time when, we talk about our day, we kind of reconnect on things. So that was a change. And also taking little pauses in my day. I work at home. You probably do too. And so it's easy just to, constantly work, because
Hmm.
there's not a time when you go into the office and come home. Your home is your office.
Yeah.
So I try to take little pauses in the day. I try to walk every day. So those were things I learned in Italy. It's a real walking culture too over there,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is maybe why people aren't quite as obese over there as they are here. And people live longer because they're, getting that cardiovascular exercise by walking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because there's no place to park. It's like where I
Right.
live.
You're crazy. You're crazy if you want to drive in Italy. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what are you working on now?
Yes. I have a couple of projects. I'm working on a biography, the first biography of the great peace activist Eileen Egan, who was Mother Teresa's traveling companion. In fact, it was Eileen who brought Mother Teresa to the United States for the first time. And she was Dorothy Day's traveling companion.
Hmm.
Dorothy Day, who was the founder of the Catholic worker movement. So Eileen was this great peace activist in her own right. Her two closest friends, Dorothy Day and Mother Teresa, one is now a Catholic saint, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, and the other is on the road to becoming a saint, Dorothy Day. And yet very little has been written about or is known about Eileen Egan. And she was kind of the glue that brought those two women together. So I'm doing a biography of her for Orbis Books, and then I'd like to do a book on Thomas Merton. I'm the president emeritus of the International Thomas Merton Society. Merton was a great Trappist monk and spiritual teacher of the 20th century who introduced a lot of people to the contemplative life, because, of course, the Trappists are a contemplative order. And I'd like to take some of his writings and write reflections to go with them as sort of a book of meditations that people can use as springboards for meditation or springboards for prayer, whether you're a seeker or a totally secular person, or you're a person of deep faith.
Okay. Nice. Thank you. Um, well, you've been a journalist. So you've written for a long time. Growing up, did you know you wanted to write in some capacity, or how did you come to that decision?
Well, great question. I was really lucky. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. It was something that was just inside of me. And at the age of 4, I would make up these poems, and my older brother, who was 9 years older than me, would write them down for me because I hadn't been to school yet. And so I was kind of lucky. I sort of feel sorry in a way for people who don't find their way that early in life, because it was very easy for me then to pursue what I wanted to pursue. And I can't even imagine, one day without writing, or I can't imagine ever being something other than a writer.
Yeah. Wow. What made you decide when to switch journalism to, like, I think maybe I could write for publication?
Well, journalism, my first love was poetry. And I've written three collections of poetry now, all after, most of them after I stopped being a full-time journalist. Because poetry was my first love. But I saw that most poets earn salaries in the high two figures.
Yeah.
So, so I thought I better find some other way of writing and earning a living. And journalism seemed to be a good way to do that. Plus, I always saw journalism and still do as being a public servant. I just bristle, Sarah, at the notion that journalists are, that there's fake news and, journalists are somehow the enemy of the people. Oh, that just, you know, angers me to no end because
Hmm.
I was a journalist for 40 years. I started when I was 17. And everybody I knew really wanted to get at the truth. They wanted to be of service to others. They wanted to give voice to people who didn't have a voice, a loud enough voice in society. And so, I found journalism and still consider it a very worthy and honorable profession.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Um, from your experience, what advice would you give to someone who wants to write? I mean, whether that's journalism, poetry, nonfiction, what have you?
Yes, I like what you said. Speaking to poets, to journalists, to fiction writers and nonfiction writers alike, I say just write. Um, don't worry about getting published. If you get published, great. But write just for the love of writing. E.B. White once famously said, "The art of writing is the art of applying the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair."
Hmm.
And it's really true. Just sit down and write. Write for your own enjoyment. Write for your friends and family, and don't worry about getting published. If that happens, that's wonderful. But it doesn't take away from the joy of writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's easy to lose sight of when you're trying to achieve or, when you have this loftier idea, which we all do, and it's good to have goals, but losing sight of the joy is so easy sometimes. Um,
And sometimes things come in cycles. Sometimes I get, particularly poetry, I've had some poems out now for 3 years and never gotten a response, from the magazine I sent them to. And then sometimes, I just won two poetry awards in a row. It goes, things go in cycles. So
right.
don't give up, is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think the universe likes to remind us sometimes. Just, hey, guess what? Uh, when we least expect it.
Right.
Things definitely go in cycles, and the timing of life never really ceases to amaze me. Some things will happen right in a row, and then you wait for other things to happen, and some things happen when you absolutely least expect them to, etc., etc. But sometimes it can be really frustrating, and sometimes it can be really amazing, and sometimes it can be both. Just depends on what you're waiting for or what the timing is, I guess. But we're going to take our final break of this podcast. When we come back, what does Judith read when she takes time to read? You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with author Judith Valente. Before the break, Judith was talking or was giving her advice for people who are considering writing. Let's go ahead and return to the conclusion of this conversation. Yeah. When you take time to read just for you, favorite authors and genres?
Yeah, well, I love to read poetry, and I really do try to read poetry regularly, if not every day, then pretty close to every day. And I love Mary Oliver. Many of your listeners probably love her too. She passed away in 2019. She was a tremendously wonderful spiritual poet without being preachy.
Yeah.
I love Elizabeth Bishop, who was a modern American poet. She died in 1979, but I think she's a poet who's never gotten a lot of the credit that she deserved. Elizabeth Bishop, look her up if you have an opportunity. There's a couple of poets who are alive right now. James Crews is one, Crews, and Angela Alamo O'Donnell, who teaches at Fordham. They're just tremendous poets, and they're regular people. If you met them on the street or on the subway or on the bus, you could have a lovely conversation with them. They're very down to earth people. We don't, they're not this like highfalutin, head in the clouds poet type person. So I
Right.
love them. And then I'm really, really getting into Latin American poets, Pablo Neruda, Ernesto Cardinal, and, any of the ones that are writing, when I read in the New York Times or whatever about a Latin American poet, I try to look them up. And then as far as Italian poets, Eugenio Montale, you can't go wrong with Eugenio Montale. I find that the Latin American and Italian poets, they're much more mystical almost.
Hmm.
Our American poets like to get into the nitty-gritty of daily life, you know, which is very good. They're very in tune with the sacred in the ordinary, if you will. But there's just something about the Latin American and Italian poets that is on another level. And I'm going to try to write more like that. I'm very, very attracted to that.
Yeah. Nice to find inspiration where you maybe weren't even looking for it. Um,
Right.
that's exciting. Website. And so if people want to know more about you and your books, website, if you have one, and any social media you're active on.
Sure. My website is www. Judith Valente, my name with an E on the end, Valente with an E on the end.com, judithvalente.com. And all of my columns that I write are on there. I write one usually every Sunday. They're on there. All of my events are listed there. And of course, the 6 books I've written and the 3 collections of poetry are on there. And then Facebook, I also put my columns every Sunday on Facebook, which is just Judith Valente. And Instagram is at Judith Valente underscore author. So
Okay.
Instagram or Facebook. I got off Twitter because I was very upset with Elon Musk. So I'm not on Twitter or whatever the heck it's called, X now.
Right.
Uh, that was my little protest.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And Judith, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure you highlighted or mentioned at this time?
Yeah, just one other quick thing. If you're anticipating or thinking about a trip to Italy, look at the map of Italy and look at regions you really don't know much about, like Basilicata, Abruzzo, Molise, Puglia. There's wonderful, wonderful places there. Try those places. They're much, much less expensive than the Amalfi Coast and Tuscany, which I love Tuscany, don't get me wrong. I love Umbria, Venezia. But look at these other places that you maybe haven't gone to. I happen to like the south of Italy. I find that that's the real Italy. The north is a little bit more fast paced, a little bit more industrialized, but you'll find lovely places there too, like the city of Turin or the city of Bolzano is in the north, where my husband's people come from. But think about places that tourists don't go. Think about a small town that you might, use as your home base while you're going to other places, and really experience the rhythm of life and get to know the local people.
Yeah. Um, in smaller towns, how much Italian do you think you need to know?
Well, not too much. I mean, if you know buongiorno and grazie and prego, you'll probably do fine because a lot of Italians have studied English. Uh, I would say 99% of Italians have relatives in America and they've visited. So you'll get by. And Italians are very patient they like Americans
Okay.
and they're very patient. So not to worry.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking time today to talk to me about your book, and writing and everything else. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Sarah, and all that you do for writers.
Thank you once again to Judith for joining me to talk about the Italian soul and writing and everything else that we talked about. Italy, especially. Still haven't been. It's on my list. I will get there. It's not even that far away now. I mean, it's still further away than Spain. It's not next door, but I will get there. And I'm looking forward to exploring and meeting people and eating amazing food, all of those wonderful things. But if you are a fan of um, spirituality books about spirituality, this will be one that you might want to check out. If you maybe you don't even consider yourself a spiritual person, but you're interested in Italy, you're interested in a more contemplative lifestyle, or a more you're intrigued by some of the things that Judith was saying, definitely check out this book. Of course, you can check out her other books as well. Plus, there is poetry that's being contemplative in a different way. I like what she says about combining spirituality with secularism, so that, because people who don't necessarily consider themselves religious often still consider themselves to be spiritual. And so you can be secular and spiritual at the same time, and you can look into the way the Italians live and see if any of these practices, any of what Judith talks about in the book, speaks to you, feeds your soul in any way. And everyone's path is different. So if this book it speaks to you, that's awesome. If one of her other books speaks to you, if there are other books of spirituality or meditation or being contemplative, being mindful, speaks to you, those things are all awesome. I hope that whatever path you are on, you find the book that helps you to feed that intuition, to help guide that path, etc. Check out Judith's books, and thank you to Judith for joining me for this conversation. As always, I hope you'll join me next time when I will be speaking to author A.T. Balsara. Andrea also writes under her full name, Andrea Torrey Balsara. She writes children's books. This is, actually, I realized that this is the cover of the first edition of the book, and we talked about the second edition of the book, which does have a different cover, and they are quite different stories. So tune in for the conversation to find that out. You may know, we may tell by the way I'm speaking that we have already had our interview. That will go up next time. This book is about a lot of different layers of things. It's a young adult book. It is about a young woman. It is about one of the main characters is the rat that you see on the cover. His name is Finn. Don't let that put you off. It's not like, ew, rats. We talk about that too, but it's about dictatorship. It's about plague. It's about humans and how we repeat history sometimes, or how we view history. It's about a lot of different things. It's about relationship. It's about finding light in darkness. Lots of different themes in this book. Again, don't let the rat on the cover throw you off. Like I said, that's the cover of the first edition, and the other edition, go look it up. It's got lots of it's much more colorful. This one's in black and white with just a little red, but that one has some really bold colors. Not that that should make a difference. Don't judge a book by its cover. But like I said, don't let the rat throw you off. If you're a fan of Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, you will definitely want to check out this conversation. But yes, there is a rat as one of the points of view, but he actually is a very compelling character in a lot of ways, and you learn a lot from his character and his character arc and the journey that he goes on. And the other point of view is a teenage girl, and their paths cross, and they both learn things a little bit from each other, a little bit from the world at large, a little bit from a lot of different places. So anyway, join me for the conversation with Andrea on the next episode. In the meantime, as always, if you are a fan of this podcast and have not done so already, please do like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching the episode on. Again, helps out the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. Another thing that really, really helps is to leave a positive review. It's very greatly appreciated by me, not because you're leaving me kind words or the podcast kind words, but because it does help to get the podcast out to more people, and that is always appreciated. If you are on social media, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Yes, that's what we're currently on. That may at some point change, but those are the platforms that the podcast is currently on. I love hearing from you. So come find the podcast. Let me know what you're reading. Let me know what's coming up for you. I can't believe it's September already. Do you shift gears in the fall? Do you read anything different? I actually kind of do. I'm not a mood reader, but I am a theme reader. I like to read things that are like holiday themed. So as we get into the fall, I start thinking Halloween and autumn and Oktoberfest and all those different kinds of things. But come find the podcast. Come find me. Tell me what you're reading. I hope you're having a great weekend. I hope that you are doing whatever you need to do for this weekend to be restful and in some way rejuvenating. You're getting ready for the week ahead. Whatever you're doing, though, I really always hope that you are finding plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to